Nice.
Only on a lighter note, this is the first time I've shaved on a Saturday, okay, after a long time, I think, right? Just
This is
because.
the first time I've shaved in December, I think. Was this morning.
Okay, great. Listen, thanks for doing this. Obviously, Kanmani and Nikhil, so the topic of the podcast is obviously like framework for like succeeding at your first job, right? And when we were looking for guests for this podcast, Nikhil, you were a no-brainer. Obviously, we know each other from high school, and we haven't kept in touch. Maybe that's a different deal. But the fact that you're a partner in Deloitte, I think that was like, you've thrived in the consulting space. So we're like, can we get someone like you? And you said yes. That was huge. And then Kanmani, we know each other obviously for like the last year and a half. And it was a very last minute. And I know you were like, hey, I'll say yes. And then later you're like, man, why did I say yes? So I'm glad you said yes. And the fact that you've been in McKinsey for, I feel like the last decade, I think that's almost
9 years.
9 years. Okay. So I feel like that's
Nice.
rare today in some sense, right? Like everyone's kind of doing the 2-3 year, hey, let's jump. And the fact that you've been with the same company, I felt like you would have a lot of insight. So thank you for doing this. And it was crazy that when we created the WhatsApp group, the fact that two of you know each other, and Nikhil, you know Kanmani and Kanmani's husband Ranga, I think that was just purely coincidental. I had nothing to do with that. So that's really nice. So thank you for doing this.
No, obviously lovely, and Blue House rules always more than anything else. And that's where it all started, and great to see you and Ajay doing this. Really excited.
Nice.
Only on a lighter note, this is the first time I've shaved on a Saturday, okay, after a long time, I think, right? Just because.
This is the first time I've shaved in December, I think. Was this morning.
I know the occupational hazard, Monday to Friday as a consultant. I have
Fair
chosen
enough.
to obviously always have the clean shaven look, so I shave every day. But Saturday and Sunday is absolute no. So
thanks for making the effort.
Yeah,
While Ani has actually not made the
I don't plan to shave at all, but actually it's funny. Ajay and I were doing this testing yesterday, and then we did the lighting. We're like, oh, the mic has to be good. And then Ajay looked at himself. He's like, dude, I need to shave. It's just like here, so we could thank Ajay also for the effort for today.
Welcome.
Cool. So since we're talking about kind of framework for succeeding at your first job, I mean, obviously the market's changed so much since the two of you started work, right? But it'll be really cool to learn more about your first experience, right? When you started your first gig, what was that like? And, walk us through maybe, some things that you weren't aware of, but maybe were made aware of thanks to your manager, right? Like usually there's a mismatch in expectations that kicks in. So would love to know how your first real 3 months, 6 months was at work. And I guess just walk us through that. Maybe Kanmani, you could start, and then I guess Nikhil, you could go next.
Yeah. Sure. So I started work about 9 years back, and so McKinsey was my first job, and it has been my only job, so I've not quit. And I didn't have work experience after undergrad either. So essentially one company person. So when though I summer interned with McKinsey, so I'll kind of like mix up both my first experience in a corporate world along with my summer intern, right? So I worked on a due diligence, which is essentially when you help a private equity or an investment fund make an investment in another company. And it was a very short 4-week piece where I essentially it was extremely taxing, and to say the least. It was, I used to come back home at like 5 o'clock and go back to office at like 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock. So it was in that sense, it was a very big expectation mismatch from what I thought a normal corporate life job would be like. I also, so then because I worked in a due diligence, so this was only for a month. And after that, I essentially started doing a lot of regular studies on financial services. So, and because I worked in a due diligence, I was basically so in consulting, usually the way it works is there's word of mouth in terms of, oh, we can staff this person. So you move from project to project. So
Right.
essentially, through word of mouth, you move from one project to another project where the manager staffs you. And because I worked in a due diligence, I was essentially put on a financial services project, which is again supposedly the bad lifestyle uh, part of it. But it was actually good fun, and I got to travel a lot. So in terms of what I learned, and what I learned actually helps me help with technically doing good or doing well in the job. I think it was more about being bold and saying things like, oh, this is not working versus this is working, directly to my manager, which I didn't do during my summer intern because I was obviously trying to get a PPO and I wasn't sure I can do it. But in once I got in the regular first year, I think I could do that, and that's basically what helped me get through that time period and also not be burnt out and continue working.
How long do you think it took you to like find or figure out really how to say no, how to say it in the right way, who you can say no to?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think it took me maybe the first study was so difficult
There's no
that
time to
I
say no.
kind of
Yeah.
yeah. So I kind of like figured that if I don't say no, I'll never last for a long time. So therefore, I think within a month, I kind of figured. And my usual way of saying no was, I don't have time this week, so I'll try and do it next week.
Right.
So, which was basically like, then everybody's like in a hurry to get things done. So it seemed like a way to say no without saying no, right? So
Right.
that kind of helped.
Interesting. Nikhil, what about you?
So I think, I've had a very similar start to the career, right, as Kanmani did, because I also didn't have any experience before I started out in consulting, right? I also did my engineering MBA, and consulting was the first job. Look, I think when you join consulting, there is a certain image you have, right, of what you're entering in terms of travel, in terms of exposure, right? And all of that is very true, right? Just as Kanmani started out with a diligence, I think my second engagement was a diligence, right? I remember. So my first 4 months was a transformation engagement, which was focused on, essentially operating model, cost transformation for a pharma company in Gujarat, right? And I think I joined on Monday, and the next Monday I was in Ahmedabad, right? For the next 4 months, essentially on a Monday to Thursday or a Monday to Friday model. And so I didn't know what a job in an office really even meant, right? Starting out, right? So it was in the client location. One thing about consulting is, it's akin to really throwing someone, at the deep end of the pool. I think leaders will say they like to avoid it, but I think it's a reality a lot of times, right? Because you want people to pick up as much or as fast as possible, right? And I was kind of in that situation. It helped. I had a chemical engineering background. On paper, at least, I was a little bit of a fit. In reality, we can always debate whether that's true. But I got into it, right? And I think within 3 weeks, I was able to find some comfort in terms of at least understanding, how businesses work, right? Because as I said, first ever corporate experience. I had a internship also, of course, which was with one of the, conglomerate general management programs that one of the Indian conglomerates run. I had a PPO, but I decided not to go for that. So this was that first true corporate experience in a manufacturing setup, right? And it was very different from what you would expect in a corporate job. So we've been, you must have read about gig workers so much, right, in the last 3 years. consulting is being a gig worker in a corporate environment, right? Because
Right.
kind of moving from engagement to engagement, project to project, you're still married to your firm, obviously, and your team. But the nature of work is
Correct.
like work, right? So you kind of move. So first experience,
Right.
good to have that because it, as I said, it gives you that intellectual challenge, number one. It gives you the challenge to build relationships, which you might not want to do when you're starting out. You're probably a little underconfident, unsure of how to navigate. But again, when you're thrown at the deep end of the pool, you have to pick up some of those skills, right? You have to stay afloat and then
Right.
figure out how to swim. So that's it. I mean, I think, and that's true for most engagement. I think it's just how it kind of gets formed.
So that's on the skill side, right? And
Yeah.
and I feel like both of you, I mean, getting through the consulting process itself is challenging, right? Like the interview is rigorous. I remember interviewing McKinsey in New York and then not getting through, right? And then it's like, oh, case study, and then there's like an analytical test and all of that. So I get that. I'm actually a lot more curious about you. What do you think the two of you did right? To kind of just move up the ladder, if you want to call it, for lack of a better word. And what could you have done better early on? And the reason why we're asking this question is, man, we see a massive skill gap in the soft skill space as well as maybe in the technical space today, right? So looking back, what would you say that would be?
Yeah, I mean, look, my point of view is soft skills are actually the harder skills, right? In that sense, to actually develop and build. There are probably two things I'd say at least I felt I did right. One is figure out how organization dynamics work, right? Across the multiple stakeholders that you need to work with, right? You have clients, and it's not just about consulting. Any job, you will have clients, number one, right?
Yeah.
You will have your own, bosses, managers in that sense, right? And then you'll have peers, right? Who you work with, you collaborate. So I think the first learning is how are you as an individual able to form these relationships and networks, right? Which help you out, right? And it's not always using a formal network to get things done.
Yeah.
You need to do a lot of things, especially with clients, especially when you're working with senior leadership with clients, through informal mechanisms as well, right? So you need to kind of marry that. And I think that's one skill it helps to develop as soon as possible, right? How do you navigate stakeholders? How do you build, your own network, which kind of helps you in your goal, right? That's one. Second is, have a constant thirst for learning. I mean, I know it's a very broad statement, but you only show up well when you have your content right.
Yeah.
And that needs you to do research. That needs you to be on top of your game, right? So if you have a perspective or a point of view, it needs to be backed with enough research, right? Now, all of that is technical knowledge, functional knowledge coming in, but I think that the softer leadership trait where that gets built is, do you stop saying, okay, or rather do you say that I've stopped learning and I know, or do I constantly read? Do I constantly look for what's happening, right? And try to build that knowledge additionally, right? So it's like that, that typical pool of knowledge, right? So it's like a spear, and all of us are within that spear, right? So
Yeah.
are you going towards the edge? Are you breaking out of the edge to just see what's unknown, what's unknown to yourself, and maybe unknown to people who you work with? So yeah, the build relationships, always learn. I think those two things will always serve you, right? And till 60, 70 also, I think that's something to keep up.
For sure. Kanmani?
For me, I think building on what Nikhil just said, it was, I think, the willingness to learn new things, in the sense that I did I did civil engineering, then I did MBA. So I did like weird things before I got into consulting. And my first study it was an infrastructure focused study. So I felt like I knew some, like on paper, again, I had some, it was, I think, the willingness to learn new things, in the sense that I did I did civil engineering, then I did MBA. So I did like weird things before I got into consulting. And my first study I did, it was an infrastructure focused study. So I felt like I knew some, like on paper, again, I had some some connection to what I was doing. But then afterwards, what I realized and what I realized over the 10 years is that if you're willing to learn and understand different things and constantly figure out what people are talking about while reading up, etc., etc., right? So I think that has stood me in good stead, in the sense that right now I feel like I can do, like I've never done a chemical study, for example. So right now I feel like I can do a chemical study because I think that I have that ability to learn and understand things from scratch, right? From first principles. So essentially, having that ability to learn new things, and also being confident that in the first job, you are basically doing one piece of work and you're the owner of that work, right? So, and being confident that you know more about it, and therefore you can, even if there are people who have like 10 years of experience, 15 years of experience in that field, you have specifically focused on a research problem or a question, and you're basically trying to answer it. So being confident that you do know about it and speaking up about it is essentially what I think helps, is something that I did right.
Right.
And also, usually in McKinsey, we say that if you want to get something done, and if you can do it in 10 different ways, try all 10 different ways at once. One of them will work out, right? So, and I find myself trying to convince my associates as a manager that you should do all of these 10 things. It's worth it, right? So, instead of
Right.
just trying one and doing something in series, it'll take time to do it, right? So, trying like very different ways to get to an answer was also something that I'd never questioned. I thought, yeah, it makes sense to just do, right? So that's the other thing that I think I did well. What I could have done better, I think, was more, I felt like I was siloed in doing one specific thing. And I'm sure lots of other people in other kinds of jobs will also feel that, because you're in your first job, you're basically doing one thing. So trying to step out of that and trying to figure out what the overall organization is about and what other people are doing could have given me more exposure and like learned more about the job initially, which has taken me a long time to kind of learn because I never tried to. Yeah, so that's basically one thing I think I could have done better.
Now, I was going to say, it's
So-
interesting you say that. Ajay, I'll just make this
No,
point.
go ahead. Yeah.
Like, so Ajay and I kind of run this performance marketing agency as well on the side, right? And we have a lot of people that have graduated recently from college, 6 months to a year of experience, and they're getting it. And one thing that I've seen is there is this, hey, let's say I give you a certain set of tasks, or I give you a responsibility for client, they will do what's expected of them. But this sense of, hey, I actually want to give you more responsibility. But sometimes there's this white space where I want you to come to me and say, hey, I can take on more. I want you to maybe even match that behavior of a marketing manager before you become that person. Right. And I sometimes feel like we have a few people, like they're great at doing what's been given to them. And similarly, there's like intangible, let's say, of like, hey, let's say we sometimes don't know the answers ourselves, right? Hey, hypothesis, I want you to go test it. But it'll be like, hey, it didn't work. Right. And I'm like, man, I wish you had a little more resilience to go do that research, like, find something on the side and come back. And then I want you to come back more solution focused. Right. So I feel like those are maybe few things that has been missing. I mean, the ones who always kicked ass and have done well have like shown those skill sets at least. But okay, so I guess we'll wait while Ajay is coming back. I think I do want to get to the next piece of the conversation, which is now both of you are essentially like managing people and managing teams, right? And like and it will be interesting to see what your like sometimes say, hey, we're millennials, and then there's like this Gen Z and this like Gen Y that's kicked in, and then like do they have this new set of attitude and skills that you need to navigate through? So I was going to ask you, and Ajay, maybe you can chime in just after this question on what you want to say. But as managers today,
Sure.
Right? Like, what are you expecting, let's say, for someone to come in and show up so that they can succeed at their job?
I can
Yeah.
go first on this
Go for it.
one. So I think the one big difference I noticed between myself and people I work with now, or myself when I was in that role and people I work with now, is that a lot of things that I took as given, like essentially, yes, of course, I should do this, is basically questioned by people, right? Like, why should I do this, or does this make sense? And I think that's a great skill to have, because that makes me think, and like essentially think about, oh yeah, why should we do this? Is this the right way to do it, right? So if I'm used to like doing something in the same way for the last 9 years, and when someone questions me saying, oh, why should we do this way, it kind of like makes me think. And I think these newer batch of crop of associates and analysts essentially have that questioning skill, right? So that's the thing that I really think that they have a great upward trajectory on, compared to what I was 10 years back. And I think the second thing is that they are more bold, in the sense that one of the things I thought I did not do well was essentially, if I have a manager who can speak up on my work, I just let my manager speak up on my work, right? So while I would know the work the most, I would let my manager speak up on my work. I think the newer crop of people are more bold in presenting what they know and presenting what they find better, to all levels of the organization, right? So not just the manager, but also all the way up to partner, director, etc. So I think that's another good skill that they have. Was your question also what they don't have and what they should be trying to do
More actually, I guess, maybe like there are certain sort of expectations that, let's say, you have, right? Like, one of my expectations is to upward manage, right? Like, I shouldn't have to reach out to you and be like, hey, where is this? Where are we going in this? Versus like, you want to set process in place where, the updates come in before I ask. And that's the best way for like to create ownership over a period of time, right? So I was curious, are there certain styles, like your leadership style, that like, something that you expect?
Yeah, so particularly now, because I'm working over Zoom and we are mostly working remotely, I think the important two things that I definitely expect is like being responsive. So let's say there's something that comes up, and essentially like I ask them to do something, at least acknowledging that yes, I've gotten this message, I know what to do, and I'll do it, right? So that one is very, I think, one big expectation. And second big expectation is like I do check-ins and check-outs usually to manage a person's work through the day. And in the check-in, I prefer if they come with something like, let's say, these are the 10 things I want to do this week on a Monday, and these are the 5 things I'm going to finish today, right? So having a clear sense of what they want to do, and then we can discuss to like reprioritize or whatever, right? So I want to, like, as a manager, I want to be the person who just reprioritizes and not like tells you these are the 5 things that you should do. So that's those are 2 expectations.
Well said. Nikhil?
Yeah. From my perspective, it's quite interesting you asked this one, because about, I think for the last 6 or 7 years, we've been running this global and India specific study on what millennials, Gen Z, and next Gen Alpha, I think it's called, right?
Is that what it's called?
Yeah, Alpha. Interesting. What is that?
We went all the way to the front again. Like, we shouldn't have started we should have started with X. That's the mistake.
So that is how it is. Gen X are baby boomer, Gen Y is millennial, Gen Z is
no.
Yeah. To Ajay's point, we shouldn't have started with
W or something. So we wouldn't have had to go all the way.
So we've been running this study globally and in India also for the last 6 or 7 years, right? And I just wanted to start from there, because there are 3 or 4 things that we've realized which kind of distinguishes Gen Z from millennials, probably, right? Like us, right? The first is,
Nikhil, sorry to interrupt. Just before that, do you want to clarify? Because I think this is something that people are confused about. What is Gen Z? Like, even in your study, what was the boundary of Gen Z?
Okay, yeah. So I think someone who was born 80s and probably early 90s, that's probably the cutoff for a millennial, right? Someone I mean, let's say someone who was born after the Soviet Union fell, right, was probably a Gen Z, right? Born. That's what I'm saying.
Right.
And that's why they are coming into the workforce, because they're about 19, 20, 21
Right.
years, right? Or more than that, actually, right? Yeah, and Gen Alpha is basically people who will come
Wow.
into the workforce in about 5 to 6 years from now, right? So I have a few clients who are already preparing for that, and that's a separate conversation.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's really interesting. Yeah.
Can't wait for these 18-year-olds to come into the workforce.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's, I mean, that's the definition. And what we've realized is, at least between millennials, Gen Z, at least, there are 3 or 4 things probably that distinguishes them, right? One is this sense of purpose, right, and what they want to do in their career. I think is much stronger, right? It could also be a function of I think general socio-economic prosperity, right?
Yeah.
Millennials probably didn't have too much of a choice, right? You kind of had to first firm up your future, right? Before thinking about, okay, what am I actually doing and how does this fit into my purpose in life, right?
Right.
So that's one big shift that I've seen, which is why am I doing something, right? Rather than what am I doing? That's but one big shift. Second, the concern for obviously, the environment is a lot more.
True.
So we have, Gen Zs asking us about our climate policy. What are we doing to kind of, prepare ourselves for the future? Right. That's the second thing. But these are still, I would say, things at an overall organization level, right?
True.
Third thing which I've seen is, and this also came about, is, the amount of stress that exists within the Gen Z pool is actually quite high these days, right? Because of expectations that they possibly put on themselves, but also probably family, career, wealth creation, and
social media. Yeah.
I think two of the things you said actually tie in pretty well together, because like if you're always looking for purpose in your job and try to answer why am I doing this, you automatically inherently put so much pressure on yourself, because I mean, let's face it, guys, like every job is not some higher purpose, every project is not going to be higher purpose. It's like they're going to be just shit projects that you do because it's the job. And so I think from every single project you're trying to get that higher purpose, I think that's always going to put that stress on you.
It's so funny you say this. I remember like when we started Master Life and perform this growth Spartan, the whole goal was, man, we want to, there was freedom and creativity to start something on your own. Like, man, half the time I'm spending is like doing admin stuff and like, oh, credit card's not working, like I have to pay the bills. It's just, there is a lot of like just grunt work, right? So, but go ahead.
Yeah. And just because I don't know what your audience is, but the disturbing fact for me in our study was also that the percentage of people, Gen Z from India, who said stress and anxiety affects them was 20 base points higher than global, right? 60 versus 40. I remember that very distinctly, and that disturbed me a little. Perhaps we're also stretching ourselves, right? The Gen Z pool probably placing a lot of emphasis. The pandemic also perhaps played a role, right? So look, I just wanted to start with this because this is the context, right, in which I am seeing their career context coming from, right? Now, how this obviously manifests is there are a lot more demanding of interesting roles, interesting projects, right? It's very stark, right? When I was starting out, I don't think I had as much of a, I won't say,
opinion,
but,
I guess.
But I mean, you were on a case and you were
happy to have a job. You
were on it. I mean, sure, but figure out when you take leave and all of that, but you were on a case, right? And these days, there is, of course, a greater emphasis on which engagement can I be part of? How does this help me, right? So that's one thing, and it's good, right, to see that, because people are then invested in their career and they're asking you some difficult questions, which so I, as a partner, I have to answer that, right? Because at the end of the day, we are in a talent business more than anything else.
Yeah.
Uh, that reflects in everything, right? More than 50-60% of our cost is people cost. Our product is our people. So especially in consulting, right? That's how we are designed as a business. So that's one area which is on interesting work, different kinds of work, and how it aligns to an individual's interest, right? So, for example, I work largely in the human capital space. So someone doesn't want to do a cost piece because they're concerned how it could impact a client's decision, right? On right sizing and things like that. They're uncomfortable with doing that work, right? Someone on the other hand could be uncomfortable with doing something on process because they find it boring or not strategic enough, for example, right?
Right.
So there are various expectations, asks, right, that we're kind of aligning ourselves. So that's one thing. And second, there is also, I think, a greater ask on flexibility overall, right? And that flexibility can manifest in the form of hybrid, can manifest in the form of hours, right?
Definitely not 5 a.m.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think diligences, I think, are still like that, unfortunately. That is inescapable. But yeah, I mean, I have a diligence starting, and I don't think people are going to be okay working after 23rd of December for a week because we are all off, and I'm pretty sure we're not going to be doing that, right? 10 years ago, we probably would not have blinked before saying yes to that, right? So yeah.
No, but if you had to flip it, this is the overarching what you're seeing in terms of patterns, right? But today, when you're hiring somebody, let's say, what are some of your expectations that you would want in an associate or an analyst so that they can thrive, right? Like at that.
Yeah,
what
I'll
would
keep
that
it
look
simple.
like?
I'll keep it simple. One, definitely intellectual curiosity, right? Without that, you can't do anything. You want to learn, you want to be on top of the game. So that's one. Second, the ability to actually show up as a leader, right? Which is take ownership of your work. What Kanmani was also saying, right? Which is if you have done something, talk about it, right? Don't deflect that to someone else. And that's very important. Because that shows how you're kind of thinking about your own work and taking ownership and accountability. Third, be nice to everyone. This is actually becoming a bit of a concern.
Really?
Yeah. I'm seeing that. I think
Interesting.
it could be a manifestation of that stress, anxiety again, right, that we spoke about. But be nice to each other. Yeah, I think that's something that maybe because of a hybrid work environment, we're kind of moving back to it. But that's the third thing. And fourth, I mean, I think most of us probably disproportionately place emphasis on communication, but I think it's important. Right? Your ability to put your point across in a precise manner, either in writing, right, or in person through conversation. I think both are very important. And that's another area which I do feel is a little underrepresented in all our education programs, right? So we obviously place a lot of emphasis on language skill, right, in terms of vocabulary,
right?
Right? But do we really place emphasis on how do we communicate in a working environment? I think that's a big gap in all our academic programs, right?
Yeah.
Right.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we'd love to cover some of those pieces actually. Like I've had people like on Slack just go like, hi, and then just wait, Slack.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, man, give me context and then get to it, So,
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So, I mean, out of the 4 points you mentioned, I guess communication could be learned to some extent, but pretty much all the other 3 are sort of inherently with you. Like inquisitiveness is definitely inherent. I feel leadership, I guess, to some extent can be learned. And I think you mentioned one more, which is be nice to people. That I think is obviously inherent.
That schools better teach you.
How do you? I feel like, and I feel whenever I've hired someone, it's been like picking a lottery ticket with these kind of things, right? Like sometimes you're so sure about someone, and then you're like, oh, how could I be so wrong? And then the opposite happens as well, where you're like, I don't know if this person can really has that inquisitiveness, and then their performance just blows you away.
Yeah.
How do you correct for that? How do you sort of filter or make that process better where you're identifying talent?
No, I'd like to think
better
that
at the start?
consulting, yeah, I'd like to think that consulting firms have at least got that right to an extent, because of the fact that a lot of hiring happens through the summer process, where you actually see someone for 2 months, right, or 2.5 months.
Right.
You're seeing that person in a 360-degree manner for a good period of time, and you're not judging through, let's say, just case studies, or let's say 3 or 4 hours of interviews combined, right? I
Right.
don't think we are even doing 3 or 4 hours of interviews these days, to be honest, when we're hiring laterally. So at least doing some sort of a pilot of sorts, which is the summer internship process, helps, right? And like I'm sure McKinsey and even us, right? We probably fill about 60-70% through that mode. That helps us a lot. Nothing replaces on the job.
Yeah.
Right.
On a lighter note, as a manager, essentially, if so usually, as Nikhil said, we mostly hire through summer interns, and summer interns essentially help you understand if the person has all the characteristics to fit into the company or not. And on a lighter note, if because we work in projects, essentially, if a person is not a right fit for the project, I just roll them off and get somebody else to fill that project, right? So
Right.
that I'm not sure is possible everywhere.
That's true.
Right.
That's true. So, okay, so we covered, let's say, hey, I'm someone who's looking for a first job. I got my first job. Here is he is what they can do. He, she, now to get my pronouns right. But now let's say what the company can do right now. I'm curious, what can you do to make sure their first 30, 60, 90 days is like that skill gap is not pronounced, right? Like, are there processes in place that you've seen in companies where, hey, here is how you should communicate on Slack? Or I use Slack, but Slack is a placeholder. But this is how you should communicate over Zoom. This is how you should be thinking about your week and weekends. Like, are there things that you feel like it's companies are doing today, or maybe even at, let's say, a McKinsey or a Deloitte?
So usually the thing to help people bridge these skill gaps that they don't have coming out of college is apprenticeship, right? So in the sense that the first manager or the second manager becomes really important in helping the person like navigate resources in the company, but also like soft skills to and hard skills to learn in the initial period. And usually what I learned, I think in my first year, has served me for quite a long time, right? So it's like, okay, this is usually the way you make a page, and for us most of the output is PowerPoint pages.
Right.
So this is usually how you make a page, is something I learned in my first year, and I don't think I've changed that drastically over the last 9 years or so, right? So I think and it's mostly learning on the job, like you're doing. So as Nikhil said earlier, you're put in the deep end in a project, and you're doing it, and you make mistakes, right? So but essentially having that safety to fail, at least initially, for about 30 to 60 days, that's what companies can give a person, right? And I love telling them that it's okay if you do it wrong, but as long as you learn from it.
Right.
That's, I think, that companies can do well. So for example, for us in the first year, there is limited evaluation, right? So the evaluation picks up after the first year. So you feel like it's okay if you do bad, as long as you, as long as you do better in your next study, right? So the flip side to it is, like, essentially, if you do bad, then for you to get stuff, because it's more word of mouth, and this person is and one manager telling another manager that this person is good versus not, is, I think, something that can not work. But
yeah. Actually, I don't know, Ajay, if you have something to add, but I actually also want to touch upon a little bit on the skills required. See, like a 10-person company versus 100-person versus 1,000-person company, skills required to thrive in that job are completely different. right? Like I think with 10, it's the expectation is, hey, you need to create work for yourself. Like it's a little more abstract, it's a little more chaotic, right? Skills required maybe a little more like you have to create processes versus 100, hey, processes are set, and then can you better that, or let's say there's a set of tasks that are very clearly defined and they're given to you. So have you, in your experience, actually maybe Ajay, even you can add, because you've done a lot of things across the board, have you seen that, like, hey, this is skills required for this size is slightly different from let's say, the size of the company?
I have only seen a 1,000-person company, and I can very clearly see that the skills required are different. Mainly because, let's say, something or the other is already done. So let's say we're doing like a cost project.
Right.
We know that these are the usual things that work in a cost project. So the skill required there is how do you navigate and how do you connect with people and identify other such projects that have been done, and instead of like reinventing the wheel. Whereas I can assume that in a 10% company, you have to invent the wheel. And therefore the skills required is actually like doing things from first principles rather than finding out what other people have done and apply those learnings.
Right. Well said.
Yeah, I think the hardest part in the 10-person company is some sort of reaffirmation that you're making the right steps. I think in the bigger company, either it's been done before, like you said, or there's a process, or there's a framework, or the wheel's already been invented. Like, but in a 10-person company, you're like, I think I'm making the right step, but I'm not really sure. And at some point, hopefully, if you're proved right, then you can continue.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting you said that, Ani, because a lot of large organizations, they want, these quick agile teams to be formed within themselves, right? They also want to move away from legacy bureaucracy as much as possible, right? And they want to create, these self-contained, empowered teams, so running with one mission, one goal, right? And that's probably not going to be larger than a 10, 15 member team. But I think the way it obviously manifests probably a little different. When you have a small company, you obviously have to take care of the entire value chain of work, right? It's 10 people have to own the entire value chain. And that means someone has to pick up 5 things, right? Rather than picking up 1 or 2 things, right? If you look at it in terms of organizations, that small agile construct which I spoke about, you will have different skill sets within that organization, right? Within that team rather, which will kind of come together, and you'll allocate work towards that sprint outcome, like what you want to do. So there is that differentiation. So in that small environment, you probably need generalists a little more, perhaps, right? But that's the thing, right? How do you pivot from being a generalist to a specialist, come back to a generalist when the context needs you to be, right? So that ability to pivot yourself also, I think, is a very important leadership trait.
So true.
Yeah, because generalist is about breadth, specialist is obviously about depth, right? And within an organization itself, you could be asked to play that role interchangeably at times, right? And that's what I see myself, or even some of the other leaders that I see, right? They have to play that role in different contexts, right? So, for example, if you're a chief revenue officer, you have to play that breadth to keep the bulb running, right? To keep the lights on in that sense, right? But let's say you're pivoting to a new product and you have to firm up those revenues, right? For that context, that chief revenue officer has to go in, has to build, the revenue model, has to build proposition, and then probably come out when things are established, right? So I think it's a little bit of that, multiple hat kind of a context. And that really sets apart leaders. I've seen leaders who are able to kind of, adapt, right? In a daily environment, right? 1 hour, you have one meeting, you wear one hat, the next meeting, you're wearing another hat. And that adaptability, I think, to the context in which you need to show up as a leader is important. Look, I'm speaking about it from a leader perspective, but I think anyone who's starting a career, they should have that, end goal in mind, because you basically should ensure that your mental models don't restrict.
Yeah.
Right? And your mind blocks don't say that, okay, I can't do this, or I'm supposed to do this.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's where I've seen a lot of leaders fail because they don't think it's their role. They don't think they need to step out of their comfort zone. And then I think good versus great probably is that differentiation.
Right.
Mm.
You know, it's funny you say that. Like, my first job was at Tesco, which is a 1,000-person company, and then 7 months later I joined Crossover, which was essentially a startup in a 3-person company. And I think the skills required obviously are different. I mean, I didn't like the big company environment at all. I just felt very like, man, I want to do more. You make me just like test this product for the first 7 months. I was playing TT for like an hour and a half a day, right? Like, I mean,
Yeah, I think there's a big distinction between consulting big company and manufacturing industry big company. Like, because I've
retail.
done both, and like manufacturing, that's a different world. I feel, especially when you're state of college. If you're the type of person who wants to talk to people and like that engagement is the core of your skill set, then you're gonna go a little crazy there.
Yeah. No, but I think the other piece that I wanted to add also is like, not everyone is going to go, like, there is a lot of the shiny object syndrome, right? I want to get out of, let's say, undergrad or masters, and then it's like, I want to join a big company because it's a good status signal. It's a place where I can make good money, right? But big companies have its own trade-offs, right? Like, you have to fit in the environment for you to truly thrive. Like, I didn't like who I was, let's say, in a large company, right? But I absolutely love who I am. As much it comes with a lot of chaos. Like, I prefer chaos over structure, let's say, if that's the way to say it, right? And I think it's important for people to identify that even in their first job. Maybe consulting is not for everyone. I remember this hula of like, when we graduate from grad school, is like everyone's doing consulting banking. You know, not everybody needs to do consulting banking, right? Like, but then you're not able to articulate that because you're young. You're not able to articulate like, hey, I'm not doing well in this environment because of X. Like, you start thinking, oh, dude, I'm a loser, right? Like, oh, I don't fit in this world. And I think that's also important to identify, right? There's an environment for you that you will thrive at, and it may not be a traditional player, right? If there are people in the company that are helping you identify that, fantastic, right? But have you come across anything like that in your experience at all? Which is like an environment kind of thing.
No, I agree. I think it's important, like so in consulting, for example, in your first job, you have some clear expectations of what you're supposed to do. And if identifying when I say clear expectations, I mean, like, it's like you are given a bunch of things to do and you have to do those things, right? So, and sometimes it can be stifling. And I think there are a lot of people I've seen who have identified that this is not something that they want to do, and like kind of like joined other things initially. But it is important to identify upfront whether you are liking this, whether you're cynical about it, whether you and you're staying in it only because of whatever other reasons, versus actually you can get by, right? So like, and you don't mind it, right? You could be the kind of person who doesn't mind it. And consulting, I think, also gives kind of a both scenarios, right? So you have, because you work in very small teams and you work for a particular client, it seems like a small place and where you have a lot of autonomy, etc. While actually it's more of a, like, you're operating within the large construct of the large organization.
Right.
So in a sense, it can give you ability to be more entrepreneurial, but I think you have to identify whether you like that entrepreneurial part or you like the other part, and then essentially take a decision on what you want to do with it.
Right. Cool. I mean, if you don't have anything else, right, I mean, we can kind of move to the next piece, I guess, that I want to actually get into the specifics, because a lot of the stuff that you're saying is amazing. And I think, and it's like, hey, we'll take these things and I want to get into like that, the nitty-gritties, right? So if you had to break it down into different facets, right? Let's talk about literally like communicating over messages or communicating over
email,
right? Like, different mediums. There's a communication play. There is a meeting etiquette, right? I'm sure there are other parts also. And so what would that look like in terms of, hey, at least get the hygiene right so that I'm not like cringing as a manager, right? And I'm sure there's been some like experiences where you're like, oh, I can't believe this person said that, right? Or did that. So what would that look like for the two of you?
Yeah, maybe I'll go on this. Look, that's exactly what I was saying, right? When you see someone for 2 months versus 2 hours, you're very clearly able to gauge that differently, right? If you see someone for 2 months and see how that person shows up at work, we're clearly able to see at least the will component, right? The skill component is a separate conversation, but at least the will component becomes quite clear. Look, not to be too critical of our business schools rather, but it's very data interpretation, quant heavy, right? The filtering techniques. And the only filtering technique that comes during the entire process is that interview that most B schools, do, right? And engineering schools, you have one entrance and that's it, right? So obviously, when you look at that entire background with which probably most of us enter the academic environment and then proceed to a corporate environment, no one's teaching you any of this, right? Right. So one way I've obviously seen some people pick this up is essentially get into, speaking, literary events and all of that during,
college
during your academic program or even outside of that, right? I remember I had a leader, he was probably 40, right? And he realized that his communication was kind of getting in the way, right, of him taking on a CEO role for one organization. So he actually just went in, there's that
Toastmasters, yeah.
Right? So he got into
I thought you were going to say toast and tonic, but
that could be another way of communicating, right? But yeah, he got into that. He went to some regional finals and all of that. It took him a year and a half, right? But he made that effort, right? So one way of doing, or building that is to take on something audacious, something like that, right? Because it stretches you. It really probably puts you out of your comfort zone to take on that as a challenge. Because you're not saying that, I'm going to pick this up in an incremental way, right? To say that I'm going to go to Toastmasters, it's something quite out there, right? So you're giving yourself that audacious goal. And one way of looking at that is building that skill set, right? But what you said, right? Hygiene, I think these are things Kanmani also touched upon, that ideally if your manager should be, mentoring you and coaching you on some of those aspects. You should also pick some of these things from observation, right? Whether it's during academics as well. You have a lot of people who you listen to, number one, and second, when you enter the corporate environment, you'll see who really shows up well, right? Some people don't have content, but they have charisma, right? So they kind of ride that charisma wave as much as they can, right? So obviously you need to have both. But you'll be able to see that and observe that and maybe build that as a skill set as you kind of go on. And sorry, I'll just end with one thing. I think the final thing is how do you become a bit of a storyteller also? Right. I think that's another very important skill set. In this day of short to hell attention span, I think the ability to just talk through stories, anecdotes, it's very important, right? I mean, I've seen such a huge trend. When I started out in consulting, clients are okay with 20, 25 page text, right? But these days they're not, right? They want summaries and they want, that sharpness, even if it's an hour, but they want just 3 or 4 pages to kind of align and move ahead, right? And that's mainly because of the fact that our attention spans are short because of screen time, right? So the ability to then bring storytelling as a way of communication, I think is also very important. And that's a very difficult one to actually pick up. That needs a concerted effort again. You need to, first of all, have a pool of stories to tap into, number one. Then have the ability to essentially, get your audience's attention and move through that. Yeah.
Right. Kanmani, go ahead.
Right.
Yeah. So I echo what Nikhil said, and so I'll just add on a couple of things that I think is missing and what kind of a skill gap and what people can do. One, in terms of that hygiene in communication, I remember when I started out, I used to take like half an hour to write one email because I
Right.
was afraid of like, what am I saying the exact right words, etc., etc.
Should I say hi? Should I say dear? Should I say hey?
Yeah. Yeah. And am I communicating this message that I want to give sharply enough? Right. So all of it took me a long time to like figure out one email, right? Which was basically a lot of time wasted. But what I learned over the course of time was essentially look at other people, like my partner, if he's writing an email. I see what kind of an email he writes and try to pick up from that, right? So that now it's coming more naturally given so many years of experience. But essentially, learning from others and proactively learning from others is something that I think people should definitely try to do. The other thing in terms of communication that Nikhil already spoke about, one thing to keep in mind is the nature of your audience, right? So if, let's say, you're communicating the piece of work that you're doing to another team that wants to learn from it, then you are essentially like giving them all the details of exactly what you did. Versus if you're communicating to a director, then you need to be much more top down and give the message, right? So people, like, usually what I've observed in terms of associates and analysts is they want to give you all the details of what they did. They've done lots of work and they want to showcase that they've done lots of work, right? So, but actually being more like, even at a younger stage in your career, being more mindful of like who the audience is that you're talking to, and trying to tailor your communication to that is important. Second, and as Nikhil said again, lots of like our B schools are not at all good at like getting people to communicate sharply enough. B schools, engineering schools, whatever. And the thing that helped me is practice. And I think it does not come naturally to a lot of people. There are people with charisma, and it does not come naturally to many people. And the thing to do is like practice beforehand, practice the messages that you want to give beforehand. And like practice definitely helps. Like it's just putting in the hard work.
I feel like you're talking from personal experience as an
It
introvert.
is. I always
You're like,
I always prep for my presentations before I and that was something that my manager very initially told me that I should do. That's, yeah, I think it's a way to like address the skill gap if you have that skill gap.
nice.
And one last thing is attention to detail. And I think it's expected of people, like as you grow more senior, your attention to detail probably deteriorates because you're into too many things.
Yeah.
But as the lowest rung in the organization, attention to detail is a very important skill to have. And it's something that essentially saves, like it's something that helps your manager, right? Like he or she doesn't have to then go through everything in super detail.
That's a good one.
Yeah. That process just to review your work before you send it out.
Yeah.
Or somebody else reviews it before you send it out, let's say to your manager. I mean, that itself is night and day in terms of
helping your manager get by.
Yeah. Cool. I was thinking we could kind of wind this up with like I send these questions across in terms of the Blunder series. I mean, like you guys, the two of you are you've been in the consulting space for 10 years. So I'd love to kind of make this a little more human. Your partners and your engagement managers, but I want to hear the not so fun side also. So I guess one question was like, I mean, it could be from not just from your personal experience, right? But it could also be from somebody's borrowed experience. Curious. Let's start with, let's say, has there been any, let's say, Zoom or meeting or like virtual or in-person meeting blunders that you have had or you've seen in your experience?
I've had one very recently, and it's a recurring theme, unfortunately. I have this a habit of like if I always have my Outlook open, and if I have a mail notification, I need to see it immediately. I have this bad habit of having to do that. And I was in a large 40-person meeting, and there was an email, and I clicked on the email, and there was a link in the email, which I thought was a news article, and I clicked it, and it was a YouTube video, essentially. So it just started playing out to the entire 40-person thing, and they all stopped, turned, and stared at me.
Oh, this is in
So
person, not even
this
on
is in
Zoom.
person, yeah. So because I've been used to Zoom for some
Love
time,
it.
I like it won't play out when I'm on a Zoom meeting.
Right.
Unfortunately, I think I'm carrying it
Oh,
over.
even better.
Yeah,
Nice.
that's
Nikhil,
I'm gonna go to yesterday, as recent as yesterday.
you guys are horrible. You guys are supposed to be setting these standards.
And it's so weird because obviously we've been working hybrid for such a long time, and the days I travel, unfortunately, becomes this nightmare on productivity. Right, these days you're in flights, you're on the road, and if someone else is actually working hybrid, you're actually not showing up well, right? And all of
Mm.
that happens these days quite a lot, and at least that's my experience. So yeah, I ended up mixing mails from two different people, and I sent them like the wrong replies because their names were the same. So that's happening. That happened once yesterday to me, and but that's just something I'm feeling that as we again kind of come back to work a little, or at least have a little bit of that in office in person orientation more. I think we'll all have to probably figure out how do we balance, right?
Right.
The new ways of working in a proper manner. Because essentially what happened to me was I was on the road, and I just my circuit was just on overdrive because of multiple things and traveling. So I just like knee jerk reaction, some mail. I thought it was from somewhere else, and bit of a sapu.
What are
Yeah.
the scariest 4 words for me are "Can you share your screen?" Because anytime I have to do that, I'm like, man, I have WhatsApp open on WhatsApp. I have Slack open. Like, who knows what garbage someone is going to decide to say at some
Yeah.
point? This is the absolute, like, my bookmarks.
Dude, same here. I'm super
Google.
scared to show my WhatsApp. If I'm
I-
sharing my screen and I share a WhatsApp, I'm like, man, my wife is gonna say something really like out of control. Or like there's a group that just
You
people saying
never
the
know,
most.
man. Like,
Yeah.
I remember there was this one time I was sharing my screen. Luckily, it was internal. It wasn't with the client when I was in consulting, and we had a Windows chat. And I had this one coworker. She always used to address me with a curse word, and if she sees this, she knows who she is. But always, so in caps, and so the pop up just came up there, and you're just like exit so fast, and you can't.
What's the
But
curse word, dude?
just oh, whatever, dude. Like, it's anything you can think of.
Flavor of the day. Flavor of
It's a
the
different
day.
one for different day. Yeah, flavor of the day, really.
yeah. I normally have like some Kindle or Scribed or some book open, and I feel like people will judge me that I'm not working and I'm just reading on the side.
This happened
Research.
to me.
It's
Something
yeah,
Due
book
diligence.
editing. Yeah.
Something similar happened to me a couple of weeks ago. One of my managers, he had his screen on share mode, okay, and it was a client meeting. It was virtual, right? So I was trying to just tell him one or two things to focus on, and I realized that one data point was wrong. The
Oh
client
shit.
had not noticed it. I messaged him on Teams, and the bugger had shared his whole screen. So everyone realized that not correct. So I just told him, fix it later, and then I like, oh god, I could message him in the door. So so gotta, I think from a leader perspective, control your impulse. Don't move to immediate feedback.
Oh, that's funny.
I had one associate
Go
who was
ahead.
watching MasterChef, I think, on the side, and she shared her screen, and essentially there was no work tab. There was only MasterChef tab. But then I remembered other people judging me and tried not to judge.
I mean,
Nice.
I feel as long as we stay away from judging the time, content they're consuming rather than I'm consuming content itself. It's
Yeah,
fine.
but
Like,
it's
why are you
becoming
watching
a
MasterChef?
commonplace though, which is like, I think, I don't know how you feel. Like, I feel like there needs to be some noise in the background.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? Like, it's either like even on Saturday, Sundays, I feel like if there's some work to do, TV's on.
Mm.
Or like, hey, there's an iPad on and there's some game that's happening. Like, it's becoming quite common. Yeah.
Agreed.
Okay, let's jump to travel. I'm sure over how many hours? Over thousands of hours that the two of you have flown. Any blunder on the travel side?
But I'm proud to say I only missed one flight in my entire career.
That's not bad at all.
Me
I'm
too.
very proud of
Just
that. And I'll name the city. It was Calcutta.
It's like you're shitting on
It's like you're
Calcutta,
calling
isn't
them
it?
out. Like,
People think it's Bangalore, right? Most likely. But I somehow managed to catch all my Bangalore flights. I had a 7:30 a.m. I left my hotel at 5, okay, and supposed to take 40 minutes. And it had rained like at 4 a.m. and it just clogged up. I reached the airport at 7 when my flight was off.
oh wow.
Otherwise, I'm quite
One
okay.
is not bad at
I'm a little OCD on travel actually.
Good.
That's the reason, yeah.
I've also missed only one flight, but I really like to push it to the last minute possible. So I used to take this Bombay to Delhi 7 a.m. flights when Jet Airways was around. And I used to leave my house at time that it took me 20 minutes from home to flight, inside the flight. So I used to leave my house at 6:10 and go into my flight by about 6:30 or so. And I missed only one. But my biggest blunder is I was
I
going
can't
to
live like
Indo.
that.
The fact that you've
Two
only
on the-
missed one.
Like, I'm getting like
Yeah, anxiety.
into a story.
Yeah.
My biggest blunder is I was going to Indore and I forgot my wallet. So I usually have
Great.
my license or something in my bag so that I can show it to the security guard. So I don't need my wallet to show my identity. And I forgot in my wallet one day. And I went to the airport and realized I had like absolutely no cash. This was before GPay and all of those like digital modes of payment took over. And I ran into an old classmate of mine in the airport, also a consultant. So I told him I didn't have any money, and he gave me all the money in his wallet, which was
Hey, that's sweet.
That was
Man, the coincidence really helped, huh?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not much of a coincidence. Every Monday morning, I meet a lot of
Oh,
old
yeah.
You know,
Nice.
any consultant will tell you the best, fastest way from entry to boarding gate.
100%.
Consultants will tell you the best SOP by airport, right?
Who not to stand behind? Yeah.
Yeah.
Which airports do you actually take the hand baggage queue? Which airports do you not take the hand baggage queue? Because you know there are airports where it takes actually longer if you go in that hand baggage. Okay? So that can be a separate podcast in itself.
The
can
worst
imagine.
thing I did. Also, when I was consulting in the US, I used to do New York, Boston, and I used to leave from the Newark airport. And the biggest mistake I made was finding this one store which sold this one choco chip muffin right outside the gate that this flight. Every Monday morning, I used to eat that damn choco chip muffin, and I swear it was like terrible. 5 a.m. muffin is just not a good habit.
But that's actually, I mean, on talking about consulting, I mean, you really have to watch your eating habits, huh?
Oh, I do.
Like, I feel like your
Watch
cycle
the
goes for a
food go down, I
toss.
think,
Yeah. Sleep is anyway going for a
Fully,
toss,
completely.
but yeah.
Yeah, look,
Yeah,
I think when the metabolism was better, I think it was all fine.
Right.
It's obviously catching up.
It's caught up so much. It's crazy.
It is bad, yeah. Because you know, you're having number one, your eating schedule is all over the place, right? And I've had colleagues who quit because of that. It got to a stage where it affected them.
Yeah.
You know, so it is a much more serious. It's not a light matter, to be honest, right?
Yeah.
But I've also know people who are, again, you know, that point of flexibility which I've brought up, who are able to manage their schedules a little better, probably. You know, look, hybrid has helped a lot, right? And I think must say it's helped manage attrition and continuity of careers to a large extent. But because travel is obviously a nature of the job, but because of the experiences during COVID, a lot of companies themselves and clients themselves now know that it's possible. A lot of the productivity comes in, right? So that helps actually. But that said, I mean, I think it doesn't depend where you're based. I keep telling a lot of people that, consultants can be in Goa also and actually make it work, right? Because you don't actually.
But the 4G and the Wi-Fi in Goa is God needs to kick in with some help, man. I'm telling you, I've had so much. I remember once we were working out of Goa, and the 4G was so bad. So Wi-Fi went. Electricity also goes, right? So we couldn't use the Wi-Fi. I had an investor call. I couldn't take it from home. So I was in my car. We drove 10 minutes. And then I took the call. I did a video call from the car. And I was like, man, like Goa, I mean, it's a little more unpredictable, but I get your point in terms of
then
location.
Gokarna is better perhaps.
Just get a wired connection.
Gokarna has good Wi-Fi because I know that. I went there for a week and it was at 250 Mbps and where I was staying. So
not bad.
Yeah. And Gokarna is our state also. I mean, so it works better than Goa. The language works.
Our state.
Man, look at this guy shitting on Calcutta, our state.
No, I can't shit on Calcutta. I'm married to someone from here. So my wife is outside of earshot.
Nice. Ajay, maybe we'll ask one more question. Do you have anything to add, a chime before we?
I had one question earlier before like my internet cut out. So, I mean, I think both of you guys and Ani as well talked a lot about how both curiosity to learn and actually learning on the job. I think one of the most important skills is learning how to learn. And I think that's when you really start accelerating your growth, is when you actually pick up like, oh, I need to learn this topic or this subject matter. How can I learn just enough to get the job done and do it quickly? Do you have any thoughts on that? How to pick that up?
I mean, I have an insight. If you want me to, if I can go first, I think.
Sure, go for it. Yeah.
I mean, one is, everything comes with a little bit of self-awareness, right? But one is maybe identifying your medium of learning, right? Some people love videos, some people love audio, text, right? There's some people are better with books, some people are better with a combination of like, hey, I need to speak to somebody and learn, right? So I think identifying what that mix is for you. And then second is, I think, just quickly applying that. Let's say the example for us maybe is like, hey, I don't know how to use WordPress to build a website. Right. I'd quickly watch a tutorial because I like videos, and then it'd be like, hey, let me just quickly create something. And then, hey, can I talk to a designer quickly and get some feedback? Right. So I think the iteration and getting to the application has to happen really fast. But to your point, I think there is some ceiling on the amateur level that you can, what skill you'll get in like a week or so. That would be some yeah.
I agree with what Amit said, and I think for me, it's like, because I want to do well at my job, I tend to like learn, and my medium of learning is books or asking someone, and so I tend to not do anything like that in my personal life. I just refuse to learn, right? So so therefore, I feel like I'm like not being overtaxed about this idea of having to learn. So therefore, it's like focused effort, and therefore I think it's doable, so I do it. So I
think defining the problem statement is also an important one, because I think sometimes people get lost in figuring out what it is they have to learn. They go outside the boundary a little times, or like miss the target completely. So I think that piece is important as well.
Yeah, one thing,
Nikhil,
one thing I'd like to add is, or at least as a suggestion, right, is to exploit all the resources that you already have access to, right? Companies have made a lot of investment in learning platforms, right? Both MOOCs content and subscriptions, and a lot of companies have built, let's say, proprietary learning content, learning pathways as well. right? And then that's a very interesting shift I've seen in the last 3-4 years, which is for a particular career track or career path, right? There are multiple learning paths which are kind of already defined, right? So it's a little bit of a guidance already being provided to you, right? Whether you're in a revenue role or a product role,
Right.
you know that these
Right.
are the things that you need to pick up as a learning pathway. And here is, access, or at least art of the possible, right? Here are the 20 things that you have access to. And a lot of that investment has been made, right? Unfortunately, when I was speaking to my clients, they tell me that only 20-30% of adoption actually exists, right?
That's across the board.
So it's more about perhaps exploiting what you already have access to,
Yeah.
right?
True.
And that only comes from individual pursuit of knowledge, because that's not something you can define as a 8-hour, 9-hour job. It has to go beyond. It has to be, I would say you should ideally do that when you have free time, right? When you have downtime, free time, whenever you want to learn, right? But make it a habit, perhaps. That's the other aspect of it, right? One way of doing that is to make it a habit.
And I feel like it's never been more important, this wanting to learn, the resilience, the intangibles. And I think the example that I want to provide was, let's say, Chat GPT-3, right? I don't know if the two of you have been playing around with it. Ajay and I have been like really trying to like figure out, hey, can we create assessments?
Losing my
Can we create
weekends to that.
blog?
Yeah.
And I feel like knowledge is anyway been very accessible. Now it's almost, I feel like it's going to get standardized, right? Like I have somebody who can, they're saying, Sam Altman is saying, like in 10 years, in terms of timeline, in terms of what OpenAI is trying to do, Chat GPT-3 might be like your colleague with median skills. So this person could be a developer. This person could essentially be a content writer, and you could get the chat to do a lot of these things, right? Now you have suddenly someone who you would be paying in today's day, let's say $50 to $100 an hour, who can do this for you. So you're, let's say, saving massive costs, but you still need to have the resilience and the will to say, man, I have these tools now. Do I want to create something on my own, right? Do I still want to thrive? So I don't know. I feel like the intangibles are getting a lot more important as time goes by.
Yeah. Chat GPT-3 is awesome.
Yeah. How have you been playing around with it though today?
So we have this. So let's say we want to do some benchmarking. Somebody had a question saying, what have governments done to improve productivity of their manufacturing or something like that. So usually what we do is we basically write to somebody who does like literature review or something like that. So instead, I kind of tried out on Chat GPT-3 saying, write an article on this topic like somebody does. And it just pulled up references of like examples of how governments have actually done productivity.
Amazing.
Yeah, like actual, like it was like an analyst doing a 1 day's worth of job. So,
yeah, I've been looking at a use case where chat can be used for news content creation in all our vernacular languages. Because a lot of news content these days is basically lifted and shifted. It's a Google translation, unfortunately, that's happening. So how do you bring a level of intelligence
That's awesome,
which makes the content a lot more nuanced, working with a client of that, yeah.
It's really cool.
Very interesting. Do you feel like this will replace, like from a consulting standpoint, like I worry, like from a marketing standpoint, like a lot of the analyst roles. So let's say what will happen is today you spend lesser time running a Facebook ad. There's a lot of like, you actually do the setup and then there's hygiene optimization, right? Once an AI level kicks in with Chat GPT-3, hey, I can write blogs. So a lot of the analyst associate kind of roles may diminish, but the productivity might become 10x, 100x. And to give you context, let's say if there's a content writer that can write 20 articles a month with Chat GPT, or maybe in the future, this person could do 200, right? It's creating articles at scale, and then you're doing some form of editing and you're pushing them out. So I was curious, maybe we're digressing, how that
I always challenge.
Sorry, Ajay, go ahead.
I even feel, what's the value of content once it has the ability to create content at scale using a robot? What the value of the content itself diminishes, right? Because why will I go seek out your content if I can just type it into the chat myself and get all the content I need at any point?
Right.
Like I'm getting content at my fingertips. So I think that's where creation of the content itself and what the content needs to be becomes so much more important. Like, am I asking this bot the right question? Am I defining what this interesting topic is? Am I doing that well enough rather than just spitting out blogs?
Right.
I heard this. So we published some research on future of work, which basically says that while some kinds of jobs might go away, other kinds of jobs might come in. And I think one example is, the system called DAL-E, right? So maybe an analyst kind of job might go down, who's like basically just doing literature review might not exist, but actually then writing the right question to find the right answers. That's the kind of job that might come in.
Yeah, look, I would love if it helps in creating single source of truth in organizations. A lot of work that's done by analysts is data cleanup and conciliation, ensuring that everyone has the same view of data, and everyone is aligned that there's one view or one single source of data. Because I see that as a very endemic problem in organizations. One is you can say the number. I mean, you can make numbers say what you want. That's one aspect, but garbage in, garbage out approach I've seen unfortunately too much. So I think if this is applied in that context, definitely, right? I mean, a lot of work kind of gets automated, and that frees up time, therefore, for what human beings are best at, right? Which is problem solving and creativity. So when you look at those two aspects, the job is getting reshaped in that sense.
Right.
So that also probably connects to some of the things that we were talking about earlier, right? In terms of storytelling, in terms of structuring thoughts, right? Structured thinking. Probably that therefore becomes even more important, right, than it is right now.
Yeah.
But look, I'll be honest, the utopian wish I have. I mean, I can't tell you, Kanmani will also tell you, data in organization is so bad, so crappy. It's shocking at times. Right? But shocking, but that's the world we live in.
Awesome. Cool. I mean, I think this was great. If you want, we can wrap this up here. And I mean, we're doing this on a Saturday, so thank you so much, and thanks for coming in.
No, it was lovely.
Yeah, thanks so much, both of you. This was a lot of fun.
Absolutely.